Hello everyone and welcome to the Planning Game Podcast, your weekly podcast for real world planning solutions to real world planning problems. My name's John McDermott from Town Planning Expert. Let's get right into it. Okay, so today on the Planning Game, we welcome Dorian Payne of, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Castell, no, I've got that wrong, Group, Castell Group. Dorian, welcome to the Planning Game.
Well, thanks, John. I really appreciate you having me on today. So I really look forward to it. It's going to be great.
Cool. So let's deal with that business name right away. Let's get the elephant in the room done.
Sure.
It's a Welsh name. In English, it's spelt Castell, which everyone can understand if you're English, but it's not pronounced that way. So go on then, correct me.
So it's our business is called Castell Group. But one of the things I come across is the majority of people I deal with in my sort of side of the business are over the bridge in England. And whenever I was saying that, people just looked at me like I had a lisp. So I decided to just mainly say Castell unless I'm in the motherland, and then I pronounce it as normal.
And then you pronounce it correctly. Oh, I don't blame you at all. It's like whenever I go to Pembroke Dock and I make the mistake of saying, oh, I'm in Pembroke, and then everyone in Pembroke Dock wants to lynch me because it's not Pembroke, it's Pembroke Dock. And then I try to pronounce something when in the anglicised version and get corrected there as well. So, you know, it's pretty standard for going across the water. But that all being said,
The Welsh are like that.
You are in a very interesting part, especially considering as we're recording this as part of the Covid Chronicles. You're in an especially interesting part of the development framework right now because you deal with sheltered and affordable housing.
Yep, that's right. So we predominantly focus on, like you said, social and disabled housing, but which also it's quite broad, as you are aware, John. It's nowadays it's quite broad, i.e., like registered social landlords, for example, that we work with. They're actually covering so many different tenure types or development types, which is social or disabled, or even things like rent to own, shared ownership, shelter, assisted living, etc. So it's a broad statement nowadays, but yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Yeah, it is a very broad statement because there are many different types of social housing. And do you work for primarily end developers or having to develop that kind of component, or are you very much a dedicated social housing developer who only ever does that form of really important housing?
Yeah, sure. So I would say 95% of everything we do is social and disabled. We do open market stuff, but I'll be honest with you, we only really do that if the risk level is just so low that it's a no-brainer, if that makes sense. Because how we're set up, so we're effectively developers, i.e., in the traditional sense that we go out, we find the opportunities, we structure it with the funding, we take it through from commencement to completion. But and our model is quite unique in the social housing sector, because traditionally working with that part of the sector, you're a contractor, but we've taken a developer's stance through it and effectively collaborated with them. And we develop, as I just said, in that process, and they work with us to acquire them at the back end. That's how we're currently doing it.
Okay, fine. So, I mean, it's a tremendously interesting part of the built environment because it's something that everyone naturally shies away from. So the moment you even mention affordable housing or social housing to a main market investor,
yes,
they will go, okay, great. How do I mitigate that?
Yeah, basically.
How do I make that go away?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, really. It's currently got a quite a bad stigma about it, where as soon as you're looking at a site, and you probably get this for, most of your days, John, as a planning consultant. But like you said, people look at sites and they're sort of like, right, this is the 106 or the affordable element. What can I do to prove that we don't need to pay this, or what's the ways out of it, effectively? But what we've done is effectively say, we've looked at it in detail, and the financial and the risk element from both sides. And for us personally, it was more such like, how do we do more of it? So, you know,
And yeah, I mean, I always say to property investors, uh, why are you running with the tide? So it's an important question I ask,
yeah,
right? They all come to me and say, oh, I want to do, and this is less of a problem in Wales because it doesn't exist, but they come to me and say, oh, I want to do office to resi.
yeah.
Okay, well, everyone's doing office to resi. I want to do sub 10 houses on a site. Okay, well, everyone's doing that. I
Yeah,
want to do a block of flats and I want to get as many flats out of it as possible. Okay, well, everyone's doing that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they're running with the tide,
And,
essentially. They're following, oh, we could get really political here. They're going along the do as I do approach
yes,
for most property training, aren't they? Because most property training tells them to go and do office to resi conversions, or tells them to go and convert a block of flats, or
yeah.
go and flip some houses, or do this, that, and the other.
You know what? It's
Really
quite
good.
interesting you say that, because what I have a few people reach out to me now and then, and nowhere near as much as obviously established training companies, which have hundreds of people go through the door every month probably. But what I've noticed, and what I've always said, similar to what you say, is that the biggest reason for that, from my opinion, is that one, they're just doing, i.e., what this sort of bold headline statement says you can achieve. If you do an office to resi, for example, you might make 100,000. But the problem is, everyone goes off chasing money then. So when they look at from a development, they forget that property development is a business in its own right. And if you start going up and just thinking about the money, oh, this deal can make me 100, that deal can make me 200, this can make me 50. What you're missing there is you're missing the fundamental business skill, the business structure. What I say you should do, and what we've focused on, is you should really find out what your passion about property development is, or what really interests you, and then you should build a business model around it that's financially viable, but also manages and mitigates your risk, and make money a byproduct of the really good service or product that you deliver. That's what you should do, I feel.
Oh, I completely agree. For those at home, when Dorian said that, please imagine John doing a fist bump in the air, because to be fair, that is the philosophy that for me wins the day,
Yeah.
right? It is the passion behind the property investor that drives the team that's working with that property investor.
Oh yeah,
If
100%. And not
passion
only, sorry.
is there,
Yeah,
yeah, and let's take my personal passion, which is heritage buildings. I
yeah,
could talk about heritage buildings till the cows come home. I had my amazing business partner Emma Morby on one of the last episodes of the planning game. I think it was a second, but one, but well, not last one, but the one after. Last but one. That's what I was going for. We were talking about heritage development, and so how important heritage development is, how understated heritage development is, and you just hit the nail completely on the head there for me. Having a passion about something, doing development that you are fundamentally passionate about and that drives you, not only makes the whole development experience more enjoyable, more pleasurable, but you grow as a person as a result, because then you go and learn about it. You educate yourself about what you are interested in. It's like when you were choosing your options at GCSE level or at A level, for example. And for those of you who know my backstory, that was not a good choice for me. But notwithstanding, when you chose those options, you did so in subjects you were fundamentally interested in.
Yeah.
Even more when you go on to do a degree.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. It's
fundamentally interested in, and it drives you.
100%. And what you've got to realize is that when not only does that having that relevant passion or relevant interest and as to exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it, what that's good because it obviously gives you the business structure that you need, and you can, you know, you're the very first part of a development process is not even sourcing, it's criteria, what I say, and it's because you don't know what you're looking for unless you've put that criteria in place. So for you, for example, like Heritage Buildings, and I've seen a couple of yours, and you've got some amazing things going on. But again, it's because your purpose there is more than just making money. And yes, they have to be financially viable, like I've mentioned. However, development is a long process. It's not a get rich quick, but it can be a get rich over time. However, but you need to make sure one thing is that you need to be ready for when things don't go well and they don't go right, i.e. we are in the middle of a pandemic at the moment, and nearly everybody that's in property development is going to be experiencing these struggles and strains. And maybe, to be honest with you, across most parts of the property investment platform, but it's what keeps you going is your passion or your relevant interest is what's going to keep you or help you keep going through this difficult time. Ride it out. But if you're just chasing money, well, everyone's going to be very disappointed, probably get disheartened, and those that were out just to get rich quick are going to be very quickly disappearing in these times. So that's what I say anyway.
I completely agree with you, to be fair, and that's part and parcel why I wanted you to come on the planning game, really, because you're a man of passion, you're a man of drive, and in these dark and uncertain times, especially when we're recording this, and we're recording this on Thursday, the 2nd of April, so it's literally just ticked over the financial year.
Yeah.
And it's a really shitty start to the financial year. You've had 2 major retailers go bankrupt. Yesterday, we're looking at losing about 1/5 of the small businesses across the country, according to the BBC. That was reported yesterday.
Yeah.
But those are small businesses that could survive. And I think it was my wife that said it best. It would never be a case that I didn't allow TPX or I allowed TPX to fail.
Yeah.
Because it would be my passion and the team's drive that would push it forward.
Yeah, 100%.
Just the same way as, development companies like Castell, and sorry, I'm going to anglicize that, so I cannot pronounce it properly. I'm not going to pretend I can. It's development companies like Castell that drive themselves forward because you are passionate about the service that you deliver. So let's talk about that a little bit more and in a little bit more depth. So how did Castell kick off?
Sure.
So how have you been going? How did it kick off? What was that conversation like with right, sorry, we're going to go and build social housing?
Well, I'll rewind a little bit before that, if you don't mind, John, because I think this is actually quite relevant. And I'll be honest with you, the things I'm saying here right now, and is because I've actually made these mistakes. So I'm very fortunate that I've been in business since I was quite young, and I'm still quite young, but that means I've been around, fortunately, for quite a bit of time. And I've actually, not in a successful way, by the way, I've made nearly every business mistake you can make out there, but I'm happy that I've made them when I was younger. And now, for example, to be honest, let me just go through it and it'll make sense. So I, my dad's a builder and my mum was a stay-at-home mum, and they became accidental landlords. So my dad bought a house in the early 90s, I believe it was, and in the same street that his brother lived in. And then within a week of moving in, they had a huge bust up. And my dad then had to go and buy another house because they refused to live on the same street of each other. So then he kept the first one and rented it out. So he actually became an accidental landlord the first time. Then what they did, like I said, he had his own building company and window company. Any money he was making, because he started seeing that he was actually making money renting out, they were buying and acquiring more properties that needed significant work doing, i.e. the buy, refurbish, refinance model. And they were doing that over some time. And when I was in high school, they amassed themselves quite a good sized portfolio of, I think, between 50 and 60 properties. And my mum, bless her, both of them didn't finish school and they wasn't very well educated, but they've done amazing for themselves. But what was very evident is that they were struggling on the rental management side because of all the regulations. Things like gas certificates, EPCs, they weren't in place. Tenants were in arrears. And because of the volume that they were having, it was becoming a bit of a problem. So I started helping my mum at home when I was in school still. Because I was fortunate enough, I was relatively literate, so developed an Excel, and over the years started building a management system, learning all of the tricks and trades from property management from my mum, really. And then when I was 16, I left school and I set up a letting agency. So that was my first business. I was doing business ventures in school, but the usual stuff like buying and like cigarettes and selling them for more, but shouldn't really be doing that. So it's
of course, not socially acceptable now.
no, exactly. Yeah, it's 100%. But so I set up a letting agency because I was doing it for my mum and I thought I could do this for other people. So I did something, again, I don't think you're allowed to do anymore, which I was just cold calling landlords. And then I was saying, because I knew they had properties available, either with their own makeshift signs or their own Gumtree, for example. And I was kind of selling to them. I was just saying, oh, hi there, my name's Dorian. We're landlords ourselves, and we found that we've got a property that we've just rented out. But off the back of that, we had some really good tenants come through. They're fully referenced and they're ready to go. And I think your property would be great. But do you mind if I just come and have a look at it first, just to make sure? Because I don't really want this tenant to go to waste, but I also want to make sure that it does fit their criteria. And I said, there's no cost to yourself. So to be honest with you, it was a win-win for them. They just snapped my hand off. And then if you could imagine this, John, I jumped on my moped with L plates, with a camera around my back, and I drove to the property of the landlords. And as I arrived there, I said, oh, I'm very sorry, but the tenant I had lined up told me just 30 minutes ago they found someone else. But look, I've got someone else back at the office that I'd like to send it to. I'm here now. Let me just take some photos and let me send it to them. Again, they said, okay. So then I used those photos and I sent it off to a list of tenants that we've accumulated through our own advertisements and managed to secure lets that way. And I was charging the tenant back then. So obviously, as you can see, there's a couple of things that you can't really do anymore, but that's how I started the business and scaled it. So I built it and I started employing people, but I realized I needed to know more about numbers. So I enrolled into an accountancy course, AAT. And then as I was studying that, I realized I needed to know more about the practical side of things because obviously cash is really important and the financials are also in a business. So then an accountancy firm offered me, I walked into an accountancy firm and offered them to work for them for free for 6 months so I could learn the trade or the profession. And they accepted. And after the 6 months, and I was building the business still on the side because I was only doing that part-time with them. After the 6 months, they offered me a job, which I took. And then with my salary, I used that with a government initiative and I employed 2 people, gave them my 100% salary. The government paid the other half. And after in the evenings, I was going back then to catch up with them and then carry on building the business in the evenings. I did that for a couple of years until I was in a position where I could leave the job. And anyway, long story short, scaled that agency into an estate agency, into a mortgage brokerage, and then sold the business. But on the way, I made a tremendous amount of business mistakes. And looking back, it's one clear reason why I made those mistakes. And it's one of the things I told people on this podcast not to do. And what I was doing is I was chasing money. I wasn't actually building or thinking about a scalable or an effective or efficient business model. I was just thinking, how can I make money? So I wasn't making the right decisions.
Yeah.
But by that time, I was a little bit older and I was still involved in the family portfolio. So I'm fortunate enough to be involved from commencement to completion of over 70 different acquisitions between residential, semi-commercial land, etc. So I used that knowledge and then started working with investors to do it myself. But when I first started out, we was doing private schemes. Obviously, everything started small. It was just normal flips. Then it was commercial conversions. But in Wales, there's no permitted development for the majority of them, so everything was full planning. And then we moved on to a new build, and we started off. Our first one was just 1 unit. But each time, again, still just chasing money, I encountered significant problems. And what actually happened was the last time I did a private scheme, the market had a slight blip. I can't remember if it was, I can't remember the timing, but the market had a slight blip and I couldn't sell it at that period of time. And I became, within a space of a couple of months, I became very pressured to sell it because I had investors, I had banks, and I needed to get out. I become a motivated seller effectively, because if I didn't get out, it would have caused a whole raft of problems, which I didn't want. Even though I've always been chasing money, I still always valued my reputation more than money, which I also recommend people do as well. Because with money, even if you lose it, you can make it back over time. But reputation, if you lose it, especially in today's world, i.e. the internet, it's extremely difficult to ever get that back. So just to give people a heads up. And yeah, so anyway, learned all of those big lessons and thought, look, I need to stop chasing money and I need to build a business that matches my risk profile, my risk criteria. Because only at that point, when I was in trouble, I actually realized what my risk appetite was. And it's not that high, like I thought it was, because I don't like that stress of not being in control and when risk kicks in. So I then sat down and yeah, it's funny how it all works. When I look back, as Steve Jobs said, only when you can look back, you can actually connect the dots. But there was a guy I used to work with, and he introduced me to a project manager, Darren, and he was a project manager for housing associations. So we kept in touch, and he, believe it or not, when I was doing private schemes, he said, "Oh, you should go down the affordable route." And I said, "Oh, no way!" Just like you said, John. I want to minimize my affordable and do everything for open market to make as much as I can. That was my first attitude to most things in business. It's clear to see why I wasn't doing as well as I wanted to do. Anyway, reached back out to Darren, sat down with him, asked him to explain the model to me in more detail. And then I realized, look, I don't want my risk profile to be high. And I want to build a real business because I love property. I always have. I've been involved with since I can remember. And I love development and I love creating things. And only when I started listing down the things I loved and how I wanted to put that into a business. So I love creating things. I love being in property. I love helping people and I love making a difference. It doesn't matter how small it is. And then when Darren started explaining the social and affordable model, I thought, not only does that help society, but if you do it the right way, you can reduce your risk profile massively. And if you do it correctly, you can still make a decent return on it. So I thought this model sounds everything I've been waiting for. And started with the end in mind this time. So spent more time on the business plan. Thought, right, where do I want to take this business? What do I want to do with it? And me being extremely ambitious, decided that building it to 500 homes per year sounds like an achievable and good goal. So I so it started with that and then reverse engineered everything I needed to do, all the way down to how the day-to-day operations need to be, and then therefore my criteria. So in a nutshell, John, I know I've been talking for a while there. That's how I've got from A to B, basically.
That's brilliant. Thank you. The planning game is so much more, or has become so much more than just a podcast about planning problems. It's about how people have made the planning system work for them. It's about how the rules have been used to make property development occur. And I've got a couple of really big takeaways from your story, but I want to just reflect upon that just for a tiny little bit.
Sure.
I whinge to high heaven to people about being afraid to tell their story. Humans are a species of storytellers, and actually the English and the Welsh are one of the sort of top echelons of that species. Our entire history is stories handed down over the generations.
Yeah, definitely.
So being able to engage with your personal story, to be able to relay your personal story so that it doesn't sound like and to borrow something from the Contrepreneur, a sob story, it sounds like a story of positivity, of action, is so important. But
Yeah,
here are the two big takeaways. One of the biggest lessons I've ever learned in business is the first rule is to use the resource that you have.
yeah,
When you first started out being a letting agent, that's exactly what you did. You had a resource, which was a list of tenants that had contacted you that wanted accommodation that you could not house.
yeah,
And you utilized that resource in order to solve a problem. The problem being landlord can't rent his property, tenant can't find property, put two and two together. That's what any good letting agent does when they offer a tenant find service. And that's what it's called today. It's called tenant finding. The
okay,
house that we live in right now is rented, and we came to it as part of a tenant finding service.
right,
We applied to the estate agent, and they matched us with the property, and we've stayed in that property ever since, and we're still living here. You know, that's tenant finding, but
yeah,
that's
great.
using a resource. Now, I think we're all guilty, aren't we, of not using the resources that we have at our disposal,
Yeah,
because we all have resources. We've got them in abundance,
oh,
and we think
100%.
it's wrong to use them. And in reality, we should be.
Yeah, definitely. And did,
Go on.
yeah, so to build on that, actually, John, there's two extra points in addition to that, which are hopefully really useful for anybody listening and decides that they want to understand their resources a little bit more. So the first thing I would say is that you need to look at what you can't see. I know that sounds really wishy-washy, but most people are looking
It
at what they
so doesn't, mate. It so doesn't. Go on. I want to see where this is going, and then I'll add to it. That does not sound wishy-washy. That sounds straight planning, law, and practice. But
Yeah, well, that's it. So basically, most people, they yes, you can look through your bank statement and you know what you can spend, and you know what you've been spending, for example, or you look at your GCSE list or your qualification list and you see what you're qualified in. But what people don't really do, which is equally as important, if not more important, is that they're not seeing what is not being told to them. So, for example, yes, you have this list of qualifications, but just because you have a qualification in business management doesn't mean that you can't do um, you can't do anything else, i.e., you can't go into property because you can take those skills are going to be what's called translatable. Sorry, I've got something
yeah,
just
don't worry.
stop people bothering me. Yeah, so those skills are those skills are going to be translatable, but they're not actually things that you can see. And when a problem comes in, you need to be able to see around the problem and what it's not telling you or what it's not showing. But it's quite hard to explain that principle. You might be better explaining that principle than I am, because like you
So
said, in planning, that's perfect. Yeah.
in planning, it's a perfect analogy. So in planning law, we always say, when we're looking at law, we look at what is said and look at what is not said. So whenever looking at a general permitted development right, and less relevant in Wales than in England, but you always look at what is not there as well as what is there. What is allowed and what is not allowed. And to
Yeah.
give you a classic example of that, my team right now have submitted a permitted development request, a certificate of lawful use, for a Class G conversion of 2 flats above a shop where that shop is a listed building. Now, we can do that because the permitted development right does not remove itself for a listed building. What isn't said is as important as what is said. And then the other aspect of that is you have to look past the building that you have. So just because you look at a building and go, oh, well, it's listed, I can't do anything with that. okay, look beyond the problem, visualize how you could make something happen. I recently had approved a building that's grade 2 star listed, so the second highest listing in the country. And in order to get that building into 6 flats, we had to persuade the council to allow us to remove floors, remove walls,
Wow.
chop a huge hole between first and second floor level to install a brand new staircase where one never was.
Wow.
Right? And we did it. But if, if we'd gone on the old principles of you can never do that, then we would have never touched that solution.
That's great.
You have to look past the problem. The
Definitely.
second takeaway that um, I would be
There was another point on the for what I was regarding the what the resource thing. There was a second bit. So the first one was about seeing what's not there as well as what is there. But the second point I would say that was really good, just to help anyone out listening, is that there's an approach taught by Cranfield Business School. And I highly suggest people do it, whatever venture they're looking to get into, whether it's property development or whatever they're doing. But it's a three-step process. The first, like you've already hit the nail on the head, is this all starts with, where am I now? So you need to assess and be realistic with yourself. How much time do I have? How much money do I have? What's my current experience or knowledge level? What are the resources have I got? So that's the first thing you do. The second is, where am I going? So that comes back down to what I said about building what vision in that business, what exactly you want out of development. Why are you doing this? And then once you've got that, and make them both crystal clear, you can finally move on to step 3, which is, how do I get there? So
exactly what I call the 3 principles of navigation, or what are called the 3 principles of navigation. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other takeaway that I took from your story, which was so powerful, and again, thank you for sharing it, was you found someone to educate you who was experienced. So you found an educator who knew what they were doing, who had a demonstrated track record in the field that you were interested in, and they showed you the path to make affordable housing work. Now, that is very different to most people's experience of property education, where they go to a training course, for example, and I'm not going to name drop, but I commented on one today, which I thought was appalling. But they go and listen to a guru, whereas actually you went and spoke to a person who was doing it, who was in the field, active, doing it, could show you and demonstrate how it worked and explain the model to you, and then more importantly, made no false promises.
Definitely. And one of the biggest things I'd say about that is, you're right. Again, I won't go into names on education company, but they're unfortunately, there's 2 different types of education out there at the moment. There's good and then there's bad, and there's kind of no middle ground really. It's and I would say the reason why there's bad ones is because they're doing the principle that I made the mistake in, and I explained should here not to, i.e. they are chasing money. So, and when they start doing that, the actual service level of helping you achieve what it is that you set out to go to the course for goes away, because it's all more about, well, you've got to pay for this, pay for that, pay for that, pay for that. And it's just trying to see how much money they can get. So that's just my opinion. But the one thing I would give to any people out there, so I think training is absolutely critical. And if I could go back in time, I'm never one to say of regrets. I don't have any regrets, and I really wouldn't change anything. But if let's just say I just got teleported back, but with my knowledge now, one thing I would 100% do is seek counsel and seek, relevant training and relevant advice and wisdom. But one thing I suggest you put in your little toolbox for whatever you do is never be afraid to ask questions. So I've listened to a book by James Caan, you know, The Dragon.
Yeah.
And his book's great. I can't remember the title of it, but one of what he said as well is that he's never been embarrassed or afraid to ask questions, even if he's in a board meeting in one of his companies, which obviously was quite large, and one of the like finance people came in with this fancy graph and numbers and abbreviations. He would just say, "What does that mean? Can you tell me more about that? Why this? Why that? What? How? Where?" The
Mhm.
more questions you can ask, what that actually is doing for you is it's de-risking your decision making. Right.
Exactly. 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 That's exactly kind of what I said this morning on Facebook. You know, the inquiry that I receive from a property investor that literally just gives me a title number with the word thoughts and a question mark after it means that
Oh,
that property investor is not interested in the answer.
no.
They just want me to do the work for them.
Yeah.
They want me to tell them how, tell them what to do, and then 9 times out of 10 I know exactly what's going to happen next. I can say, great, John, done the deal. Can you go and sort that for me, without doing any risk analysis, without doing anything. They've just gone and said, yeah, all right then. All
Yeah.
right, and get a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The most intelligent investor is a person who would ask intelligent questions. They're the ones that will turn around and say, okay, you said that, now tell me why.
Yeah.
Let me understand it. And this is where and the sort of final thing I'm going to talk about with you, I think, Dorian, is the importance of a development model.
Yeah.
So this is where I say to them, right, what is your development model? And we know what your development model is. Your development model is SA. It is not SA at all. It's sheltered accommodation, a different type of SA, and affordable housing.
Yeah.
But what is the question I ask investors is, what is your primary development model? Do you even understand what that looks like?
So our business. I mean, if you could peel back our business, it would be. Hopefully, I would hope that you would be pleasantly surprised. We've taken inspiration from another book read, obviously Grinding It Out, Ray Kroc, McDonald's.
Mhm.
Everyone knows that. But their processes and systems are phenomenal because they have one of the highest staff turnover in the world. So because of that, to make sure their training cost isn't astronomical, because obviously the prices isn't really that high. They need to develop and they need their business to effectively be run by people who could learn what to do within a few hours. That's really what they needed to do. So we took the same principle and decided to put that into our business. So yeah, we specialize in collaborating with private investors to develop and deliver high quality social and disabled homes. And we have a criteria of our process starts with firstly having the criteria. So we have a criteria for deals and money. So we know in what area exactly what type of land or brownfield site we are looking for, how big it needs to be, and why we're looking for land that way. Because we reverse engineered from what we know the house that registered social landlords require. And once we've know what their criteria is, we effectively plug that into our deal sourcing criteria. So when we go to look at, like I said, a piece of land, for example, instead of just looking at and saying, you know, what can I fit on there? We turn around and say, how does this fit their appetite? What would they need on here? What is the demand that they have? So that's how we approach it. And obviously our development process, each part of the stage has a process behind it, like systemization. So anybody can pick up in our business any project, and they should know what comes next in the cycle. So, and what tasks to do, or who's part of the team, who they need to reach out for next. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that absolutely does. That absolutely does. And it comes back to one of the fundamentals that I talk on, doesn't it really, which is to play the game, you must first know the rules.
Oh,
To play the
yes.
game well, you must know which rules you can break. And in reality, that's exactly what you're doing. Is you're not only playing the game, but you're playing the game well because you know exactly what the rules are, and more importantly, exactly what it's like. To give a really good example, it's like the Welsh rugby coaches saying, you know what, we kind of want to win against Australia, but if we win against Australia, we're going to end up with New Zealand in the semi, and actually it will be better for us if we get Tonga in our particular semi-final by coming second instead of first. So
Yeah.
what we'll do is we'll play our socks off, but we'll play our socks off to come second
Yeah.
instead of come first, because
Oh,
we get an easier route through
yeah.
the
100%.
game.
And just to find an analogy, because for some reason analogies get contagious. But one thing I would say is, like, business for me is it's kind of like a game of chess. So even though so when you're playing against the opponent, you should always be thinking a few steps ahead. As
Mm,
when you make the move, like, to bring all that back down to reality. When you make a business decision or a business move, you need to know what that's going to have an impact on, i.e. your ripple effect. So whatever decision you make now will have an effect in X amount of months, something
yeah,
like that. So that's quite important, I would say.
yeah, absolutely. Dorian, it's been brilliant. We've run out of time, and I could
Yeah.
speak to you for hours more. It's been brilliant having you on the planning game. If you were talking to a brand new property investor now and giving them the one key bit of advice, the one takeaway that you think they should listen to as an experienced property developer yourself, what would that be?
Wow. Yes. Well. Firstly, thank you, John, for having me on. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great to talk to someone that's on a similar wavelength to myself. But to answer your question, that is really tricky because you've only given me one, one, two. So if I could only say one thing, there's so many things I could say. I could probably write a book on it, even though I'm nowhere near to. But to be honest, you listen to this. That's the one tip I would say. Subscribe to John's channel, the Planning Game, and listen to this and the other ones, the other episodes, and you'll learn a tremendous amount. But for me to say one giveaway, if I can only give you one, it would have to be don't rush, because there's so many on top of that I would love to say. But the first thing is, well, especially just starting out, don't rush. Try and learn about it as much as you can. Learn the rules, like you said. Learn your playing field. Learn who your spectators are. Learn how you can which rules apply in certain times and some don't. I.e. golf. So there's winter rules and then there's normal rules. So just don't rush and try and develop that passion. That's the biggest thing I would say.
Thank you, Dorian. If people want to get a hold of Dorian Payne at Castell, again pronounced tremendously wrong, how do they do it?
So you can find me on social media. It's all linked to my phone, so it will come through, and it's just at Dorian Payne Property. But you can also check our website out, www.castell group.co.uk.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dorian, for joining me on the planning game. That's been brilliant. Guys, as always, I have no idea who's next in the COVID Chronicles because it does depend on who comes out of coronavirus next. So I'll catch you next time on the planning game. He's been Dorian, I've been John. Thank you so much for listening.